Ever felt like you messed up so bad you had to run away, but then stumbled into something that like changed your whole life? That's what happens to Jacob in Genesis chapter 28. Welcome to the Make Heaven Crowded podcast, where we break down the Bible and help you see how it can be so like your life.
Absolutely.
Today we're going deep into Genesis 28.
Okay.
We'll unpack every verse and
Sounds good.
see what it all means.
Love it.
So this story's got symbolism and promises and even a glimpse of God himself.
Wow, that's amazing.
It's really a turning point for Jacob.
Yeah.
He's dealing with the consequences of his past,
Right.
having this crazy encounter with God. And then he's starting on this journey of faith.
I see.
So right off the bat in the first few verses, we find Jacob on the run.
Oh.
He tricked his brother Esau, and now he's afraid of what Esau might do.
Makes sense.
But his dad Isaac doesn't just send him away for safety.
Right.
He tells him to go find a wife, and he gives him some specific instructions.
Okay.
He says, "Thou shalt not take a wife of the daughters of Canaan."
That's interesting.
Why was marrying outside their community such a big deal?
Well, it all goes back to God's covenant with Abraham. God promised to bless Abraham's descendants and make them a blessing to the whole world.
I see.
But marrying a Canaanite woman was like introducing foreign beliefs and practices.
So it could mess things up.
Yeah, it risks diluting God's promise and his plan for his people.
That makes sense.
This idea of staying within the covenant community pops up all over the Old Testament. It shows how God had a specific purpose for his people, and they were meant to be set apart.
Right.
It's about staying true to their identity and mission.
So Jacob's off to find a wife, but then his brother Esau realizes something.
Oh, what's that?
His Canaanite wives aren't winning his parents over. So he tries to fix things.
What does he do?
He marries Mahalath, who's the daughter of Ishmael.
Ishmael? Wasn't he Abraham's son?
Exactly.
So Esau's trying to get closer to the family line.
You got it.
But even though Ishmael was related to Abraham, he wasn't part of the covenant promise.
Right.
It shows how Esau's still operating outside of God's plan.
He's always trying to cut corners.
It's like he's looking for a shortcut to the blessing, but he's missing the point.
So while Esau's trying to win back his parents, Jacob's all alone, heading to this faraway land.
It must have been scary.
Verse 10 says, "And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran." It's a simple verse, but it marks a huge change.
Yeah, he's leaving everything behind.
He's stepping into the unknown.
Kind of like when you graduate college or move out for the first time.
Exactly.
You're excited, but also a little scared.
Yeah, there are endless possibilities ahead of you.
It's a time of transition.
For Jacob, it's not just about physical distance. It's a spiritual journey, too.
He's shedding his old life.
Leaving behind his old ways of thinking.
Becoming someone new.
And then he reaches verse 11. He stops for the night, and something amazing happens.
Oh, what's that?
But before we get into that, let's think about where he is.
Okay.
He's alone, tired, and vulnerable.
Wow.
He rests with just a stone for a pillow.
Ouch.
Stripped of all his comforts, completely dependent on God.
That's powerful.
It's in this moment of total vulnerability that God chooses to reveal himself.
That's amazing.
It's like sometimes God allows us to be stripped bare, to reach the end of
To
ourselves,
show us your need for him.
so we can fully experience his grace and his power.
Wow.
And this brings us to the dream in verse 12.
Yeah.
"And he dreamed, and behold, a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it."
A ladder to heaven. That's incredible.
What do you think that ladder symbolizes?
It's like a bridge, a connection between heaven and earth.
Right.
It shows how God is actively involved in what's happening down here. The angels going up and down show that there's constant communication between God and us.
It's like God is saying, hey, I'm here, I'm engaged, and I'm working behind the scenes.
Yeah, it's a picture of his presence and his involvement in our life.
And this imagery isn't just in this dream.
Oh, really?
We see ladders and stairs and things connecting heaven and earth throughout the Bible.
Wow.
And ultimately, they all point to Jesus.
How so?
In John 1:51, Jesus says, "You will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man."
That's amazing.
Jesus is the true ladder.
Wow.
He's the ultimate connection between humanity and God.
So this simple dream actually has deep theological meaning.
Absolutely.
It foreshadows the coming of Christ.
It's amazing how much is packed into this one short chapter.
It really is.
So what happens next in the dream?
Well, in verses 13 through 15, God speaks to Jacob from the top of the ladder. He reaffirms the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac.
Okay.
He promises Jacob land tons of descendants and that all the families of the earth will be blessed through him.
Wow, that's a lot. But the most important part is this. "And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of. It's a promise of protection, of provision, and of God fulfilling his plan.
God's basically saying, Jacob, I've got you no matter what.
It's a powerful message for us, too.
Definitely.
God is faithful, he keeps his promises, and he never abandons us.
So true.
So Jacob wakes up from this incredible dream.
Yeah.
How does he react?
Well, verse 16 says, and Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not.
He's filled with awe and wonder.
He realizes that this ordinary place where he slept is actually holy ground.
It's like his eyes have been opened to a whole new reality.
Yeah, he's seeing things in a different light.
And then he says something really interesting in verse 17.
What's that?
How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
Dreadful. I wouldn't think of God's house as dreadful.
He's not using dreadful in the way we normally do.
How so?
He's talking about a sense of awe and reverence and holy fear.
I see.
It's the realization that he's standing in the presence of the Almighty.
Wow.
And then he does something really significant.
What's that?
He renames the place Bethel, which means house of God.
He's marking the spot where he had this life-changing encounter.
It's a permanent reminder of what happened there.
It shows how deeply he was impacted by this experience.
It's not just about the place itself, it's about the change that happened inside Jacob.
He's starting to understand the magnitude of God's love and power and faithfulness.
What does he do next?
He takes the stone that he used as a pillow and sets it up as a pillar, and then he pours oil on it.
What's that about?
It's a symbol of consecration.
Okay.
It's a physical act of worship, commemorating his encounter with God and marking the spot as sacred.
It's like he's saying, God, you were here, you met me here, and I'll never forget it.
Exactly.
It's a powerful way to express his gratitude and devotion.
And then we come to the vow.
Okay, what does he promise?
In verses 20 through 22, he says, if God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on so that I come again to my father's house in a peace, then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me, I will surely give the tenth unto thee.
Wow, so he's saying, God, if you take care of me, I'll serve you and give back a portion of what I receive.
Yeah, he's making a conditional vow.
Does that make it less meaningful?
That's a question people have debated for centuries. Some might see it as a sign of weak faith, but it's important to remember that faith is a journey.
Right.
At this point, Jacob is just beginning to grasp God's power and faithfulness.
He's still learning.
His vow, while conditional, shows a sincere desire to follow and honor God.
It's like he's taking a step, maybe a hesitant one, toward a deeper relationship with God.
Exactly.
And we see this pattern throughout the Bible. People encounter God, they make vows, they stumble and fall.
Yeah.
But God patiently pursues them.
He refines their faith
And draws them closer to him.
It's a beautiful picture of God's grace and mercy.
So this first part of Genesis 28 is packed with meaning.
It really is.
What stands out to you as the most significant takeaway so far?
I think it's the reminder that God is actively involved in our lives even when we're not aware of it. He meets us where we are. He communicates with us in unexpected ways, and he invites us into a deeper relationship with him.
That's so encouraging.
And even when our faith is imperfect, he's patient and gracious and helps us to grow in our understanding of him.
I love that. And the transformative power of encountering God is so clear here.
Absolutely.
It can change our whole perspective, redesign our priorities, set us on a completely new course.
It's amazing.
It makes me think about those Bethel moments we experience. Those times when God breaks through the ordinary and reveals himself in ways that change us forever.
Those moments are so precious.
I agree.
And as we continue exploring the second half of Genesis 28, we'll see how Jacob's experience at Bethel shapes his journey.
Okay.
It impacts his relationships, his choices, and ultimately his legacy.
That's something to look forward to.
Definitely. So we left off with Jacob receiving this promise from God, marking that spot.
But the story doesn't end there.
Right.
Genesis 28 keeps going.
It does.
And we shift our focus for a minute to Esau in verse 6.
Okay.
We see how he reacts to Jacob leaving and getting that blessing.
Interesting.
Esau figures out Isaac has blessed Jacob and sent him off to find a wife. And he specifically told him not to marry a Canaanite woman.
Right.
Now remember, Esau already has Canaanite wives.
Yeah. So how does he feel about all this?
Well, verse 8 says, Esau, seeing that the daughters of Canaan pleased not Isaac his father.
He realizes he messed up.
Pretty much.
So what does he do?
Does he try to find wives who would be more acceptable, within the covenant?
Good question.
Not really. He goes and marries Mahalath, the daughter of Ishmael.
Ishmael, Abraham's son.
That's the one.
So he's trying to get even closer to the family line than Jacob.
Yeah, like he's trying to one-up him.
But marrying into Ishmael's family is still outside the covenant promise, right?
Exactly.
It shows Esau's still focused on himself.
Yeah, he's always trying to play this system.
He wants the blessing but doesn't really get what the covenant is all about.
He's missing the point.
It's like trying to win a game by cheating.
You got it.
The rules are there for a reason.
Right.
And Esau's not playing by them.
This whole story of Jacob and Esau, it's not about who seems more deserving on the outside. It's about God's choice and whether your heart lines up with his plan.
That's a powerful point.
So while Esau's trying to work things in his favor, Jacob keeps traveling.
Right.
Let's go back to verse 10
Okay.
and follow him as he sets off for Haran.
Sounds good.
The verse just says, "And Jacob went out from Beersheba and went toward Haran."
Simple but significant.
Yeah, it's a huge turning point.
He's leaving behind the only life he's ever known.
Stepping out in faith.
Into the unknown.
Like we were saying before, it's like graduating college or moving out for the first time.
Right.
All those mixed emotions.
The excitement.
A sense of endless possibility.
It's a time of transition and growth.
And for Jacob, it's not just physical, it's spiritual.
He's leaving behind his old ways of thinking.
Becoming a new person.
And this leads us back to verse 11,
Uh-huh.
where Jacob stops for the night.
That's right.
And has that incredible dream at Bethel.
But before we get to the dream itself,
Okay.
it's important to remember the setting.
What do you mean?
Jacob's alone.
Yeah.
Tired.
Uh-huh.
Vulnerable.
He's far from home with no one to rely on but God.
Exactly.
He's using a stone as a pillow.
No comforts, just the bare necessities.
And it's in that moment of complete dependence that God chooses to reveal himself.
That's so powerful.
It's like God allows us to be stripped bare.
To empty ourselves.
To show us how much we need him.
So we can truly experience his grace and his power.
So true.
Okay, let's talk about the dream itself.
The ladder to heaven.
Verse 12 says, "And he dreamed to behold a ladder set up on the earth, and the top of it reached to heaven, and behold, the angels of God ascending and descending on it."
Wow, what an image.
What do you think that ladder represents?
It's like a bridge between heaven and earth,
Uh-huh.
showing how God is actively involved in our world.
Right.
The angels going up and down represent constant communication between God and us.
It's like God saying, "I'm here, I'm present, I'm working behind the scenes."
Yeah, it's a beautiful picture of his involvement in our lives.
And this imagery goes beyond just this one dream.
Really?
We see ladders and stairs and things connecting heaven and earth all over the Bible.
Interesting.
And they all point to Jesus.
How so?
In John 1:51, Jesus says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened, and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man."
Wow, so Jesus is the true ladder.
Exactly.
The ultimate connection between us and God.
This seemingly simple dream has such deep theological meaning.
It foreshadows the coming of Christ.
It's amazing how much is packed into this chapter.
It really is.
So what happens next in the dream?
Well, in verses 13 through 15, God speaks to Jacob from the top of the ladder.
Okay,
He reaffirms the covenant promises made to Abraham and Isaac.
the promises of land descendants and blessing,
Exactly.
and that all the families of the earth would be blessed through him.
That's right.
And God gives Jacob this amazing assurance.
What's that?
He says, "And behold, I am with thee, and will keep thee in all places whither thou goest, and will bring thee again into this land, for I will not leave thee until I have done that which I have spoken to thee of."
Wow, that's powerful.
It's a promise of protection, provision, and God's faithfulness in fulfilling his plan.
God's telling Jacob, I've got you no matter what.
It's a message for us, too.
Definitely.
God is always with us. He keeps his promises and never abandons us.
That's such a comforting thought.
So Jacob wakes up from this incredible dream.
Uh-huh.
And how does he react?
Well, verse 16 says, "And Jacob awaked out of his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I knew it not."
He's in awe.
He realizes that this ordinary place where he slept is actually holy ground.
It's like his eyes have been opened to a reality he never saw before.
Yeah, his perspective has completely shifted.
And in verse 17, he says something interesting.
What's that?
"How dreadful is this place? This is none other but the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven."
Dreadful. That's a strange word to use.
Right. We don't usually think of God's house as dreadful.
So what does he mean?
He's not using dreadful in the way we typically do.
Okay.
He's talking about that sense of awe, reverence, and holy fear.
The kind of fear you feel when you realize you're in the presence of something much greater than yourself.
Exactly.
And he renames the place Bethel, which means house of God.
Marking the spot where he had this incredible encounter.
A permanent reminder of God's presence.
It's not just about the location, though. It's about the transformation that happened inside Jacob.
He's beginning to grasp the immensity of God's love and power and faithfulness.
What does he do after this?
He takes the stone he used as a pillow and sets it up as a pillar, and then he pours oil on it.
What's the significance of that?
It's a symbol of consecration,
Okay.
a physical act of worship,
To commemorate his encounter with God.
and mark the spot as sacred.
Like he's saying, God, you were here, you met me here, and I won't forget it.
Precisely.
A powerful way to express his gratitude and devotion.
And then we come to the vow.
What does Jacob promise?
In verses 20 through 22, he says, "If God will be with me and will keep me in this way that I go, and will give me bread to eat and raiment to put on, so that I come again to my father's house in peace, then shall the Lord be my God, and this stone which I have set for a pillar shall be God's house, and of all that thou shalt give me I will surely give the tenth unto thee."
So he's saying, God, if you take care of me, I'll serve you and give back a portion of what you provide.
It's a conditional vow.
Does that make it less meaningful?
It's a question that's been discussed for centuries.
Hmm.
Some see it as a sign of weak faith.
Yeah.
But remember, faith is a journey.
Right. We don't start out with perfect faith.
Jacob's just starting to understand God's power and faithfulness.
He's still learning and growing.
And his vow, even though it's conditional, shows a sincere desire to follow and honor God.
It's a step, maybe a hesitant one,
But a step nonetheless.
toward a deeper relationship with God.
We see this pattern throughout the Bible.
People encounter God, make promises, stumble, and fall.
But God patiently pursues them
Refines their faith.
and draws them closer.
It's a beautiful picture of God's grace and mercy. So we've journeyed with Jacob from Beersheba to Bethel,
We've witnessed his transformation.
from deceiver to someone humbled by a divine encounter.
As we move into the last part of Genesis 28, what are some key things we can learn from this chapter so far?
Great question.
Well, I think one of the most powerful messages is that God is actively involved in our lives.
Even though we don't realize it.
Exactly.
He meets us where we are, speaks to us in unexpected ways, and calls us into a relationship with him,
And even when our faith is imperfect, he's patient and gracious.
working with us as we grow in our understanding of him. I love that.
And the transformative power of an encounter with God is so clearly shown here.
Right?
It can change our whole outlook on life,
Our priorities.
even our direction.
It makes me think about those Bethel moments in our own lives.
Mm.
Those times when God breaks through the ordinary and reveals himself in a way that changes us forever.
Those moments are so special.
They really are.
And as we dive into the final verses of Genesis 28, we'll see how Jacob's experience at Bethel shapes the rest of his journey,
Okay?
how it impacts his relationships, his choices, and ultimately his legacy. We've been following Jacob, running from his brother Esau,
Getting that blessing from his dad.
and having that incredible encounter with God at Bethel.
It's been a story of transformation, for sure.
Yeah, both physically and spiritually.
We see him struggling with his past, getting these promises for the future.
Right.
And really starting to understand God's love and faithfulness.
A beautiful thing.
So in the last few verses of this chapter, we see Jacob still wrestling with everything that happened at Bethel.
Okay.
We left off with his vow in verses 20 through 22.
Right, where he promises to serve
To
God.
give a tenth of everything he receives.
Yeah, if God protects him and brings him home safely.
It's interesting because it shows how his faith is developing.
It's a conditional vow.
But it also shows he's realizing how powerful God is.
And that God provides for us.
He's recognizing that everything he has comes from God.
And committing to a life of gratitude and obedience.
It's like he's saying, God, if you're with me on this journey, I'll walk with you.
Exactly.
And that's something we can all relate to, I think.
We might not start out with rock-solid faith.
Sometimes it's a
We
process.
take those first steps maybe a little hesitant.
But as we experience God's faithfulness, our trust grows stronger.
And this vow also brings up tithing.
Okay, that becomes a big deal in the Old Testament.
It's a tangible way for Jacob to show his banks.
To acknowledge that God owns everything.
So Jacob's faith isn't just words.
He's putting it into action.
And that's what God calls us to do.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into Genesis 28,
Yeah.
what's the big takeaway?
What can we learn from this chapter?
We've talked about all the theological stuff,
The symbolism, the covenant promises.
but what does it mean for us today?
Well, I think there are a few important lessons here.
Okay.
First, it shows how much God pursues us,
Even when we mess up,
even when we run away or doubt,
God's always there seeking us out.
trying to draw us closer to Him.
We can never escape his love.
That's so encouraging.
The second thing that stands out is how powerful it is to encounter God.
Like Jacob at Bethel,
It changed his whole life.
his perspective, his priorities, everything.
And God can meet us in the most unexpected places.
Sometimes it's a sudden dramatic experience,
But sometimes it's more gradual.
a process of growth and discovery.
We don't always have these mountaintop moments.
But God is always working in us.
The third thing is how this chapter points to Jesus.
Oh, yeah.
The ladder is a symbol of the connection between heaven and earth.
And Jesus is the ultimate bridge.
He makes it possible for us to have a relationship with God.
It's amazing to see these Old Testament stories connected to Jesus.
And the last thing is that this chapter challenges us to find those Bethel moments in our own lives. Those times when we feel God's presence.
When we sense his guidance and his love.
Those moments that change us forever.
We need to be open to those moments.
To pay attention to how God is working.
So where are those Bethel moments in your life?
Where have you encountered God in unexpected ways?
And how does that change you?
If you want to see a visual representation of Jacob's journey and that dream at Bethel, check out the Make Heaven Crowded YouTube channel.
We have an awesome animated video that brings this whole chapter to life.
It's a great way to experience the story in a new way.
And share it with others.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Genesis 28.
It's been fun exploring this chapter.
We hope you found it encouraging and helpful.
Remember to keep looking for those Bethel moments in your own life.
And until next time, keep making heaven crowded.